We take that very seriously. We take the research part of it seriously, and for us that means that the focus of our research, the focus of our teaching, is the preparation of professionals who can serve to address the challenges of urban living. That's what the urban part of that designation means to us. The research part of that designation, we are an R2 institution. For those of you who are not familiar with the Carnegie classification of higher ed institutions, R2 means research high. There's just one level above us, and we're aiming to get there. We have a plan for getting there, and we are very proud of the progress that we are making here at Morgan State University. I hope you've enjoyed the campus and you've enjoyed being in this facility. In the School of Education, that designation of preeminent urban research university means that our focus is on the preparation of educational professionals across the K-20 spectrum for addressing the problems of urban education. And if I were to sum up what those problems are in a single word, it would be inequity. Inequity of outcomes, inequity of resources, teacher-student ratios, and a range of other inequities that plague urban educational systems. And we think that our job in the School of Education is to prepare professionals who can help to reverse the negative effects of some of those inequities. We are very aware that many of them have long historical roots. Many of them are structural and policy-based. But we firmly believe that people like you, professionals in the classroom, have the ability to help our young people, our children and youth, to rise above the negative impact. So sometimes we tend to think that if it's bad, urban schools have more of it, and if it's good, urban schools have less. But I think that's a defeatist kind of attitude. And I think what is required of us is that we take the strong assets that urban environments provide. One of those assets is right here in this room, that's you. Committed teachers who understand what it means to work with children who come from less advantaged backgrounds, let's put it that way. And I know that in talking about that to a group like this, I'm almost preaching to the choir because that's what you are about. And I know that the place to start is in thinking differently about achievement. Achievement has to be more than test scores. And it has to be about changing the way children think about themselves, giving to them the ability to rise above difficult circumstances and the confidence that they can achieve. And so I hope that the sessions that you had this morning, that as you reflect on them, you would see them not just as a new set, well, in some cases not even new, but not just as a bag of tricks and new things to do Monday morning in the classroom, but really as about helping children to realize their fullest potential. And it means giving them a sense of self-worth and respect and the confidence that they can learn and succeed. And I know that's the task to which you are committed. I am so thankful to you, John, and to the organizers of the Baltimore Curriculum Project, the organizers of this event, for choosing Morgan. We are excited to have you here because we want to partner with you in this work of making children's lives better. I know that many of you know Dr. Tracy Rowan. Dr. Tracy Rowan has recently joined. Tracy, will you stand? I'm excited that Tracy has recently joined the School of Education. I didn't tell you that my name is Glenda Prime and I'm the Dean of the School of Education and Women's Studies. And I'm very happy to have Tracy join us. I feel that together with the dedicated and committed faculty that we have, and with Tracy on board, we can form lasting partnerships with people like yourselves and organizations like the Baltimore Curriculum Project to make the lives of children better. I welcome you, and let me end with a commercial. We have within the School of Education and Women's Studies, we have 5 doctoral programs and 4 master's programs in various aspects of education. We have a table set up out in the corridor where you can get some more information. We'd love to have some of you join our programs and benefit from what we have to offer. Thank you, and I wish you a very productive afternoon. I'm very proud of the faculty who are going to present to you this afternoon, faculty from the School of Education. They are amazing, they are at the cutting edge of their fields, and I know that you will benefit from what they have to offer. Thank you.
Be here on this impressive, historic, important campus in this incredible facility. I think we've found a new home, and we're looking forward to many more years of a fruitful partnership. Let me be the second to welcome you to our Leading Minds Forum. All of you incredible, beautiful BCP teachers, you are absolutely the best that I can imagine, and I want to thank you all for being here and working so hard. Now, some of you in this room who have been with BCP for 5, 10, 15, 20 years may wonder why you need to be, learning about teacher preparation and recruitment and retention, because you've been prepared, you've been recruited, you've been retained, but you know what? I'm going to tell you why we all need to know about it. Because many of you mentor new, formally and informally mentor new teachers. Many of you in this room are involved in the hiring of new teachers. And every one of you in this room is affected by the effectiveness of the staff that surround you every day. So the more we all understand and get better at bringing in qualified people and supporting them and training them and keeping them, the better off we're all going to be. I'm mostly up here right now to talk a little bit about Brenda Kahn. Many of you in this room were fortunate enough to know Brenda. For those of you who are visitors today or new to our schools, Brenda was a long-time BCP coach and mentor who very sadly passed away last June at the age of 49. And we miss her every day. Shortly after Brenda died, John McGill suggested that we honor Brenda's legacy by naming an award after her and presenting it annually to an educator in a BCP school who exemplified the qualities we knew and loved in Brenda. Some of those qualities include an extremely high degree of organization. She didn't have a master's degree in library science for nothing. An entire building full of books, labeled and organized by numbers and sections, was right up her alley. She was a great writer, more specifically of teacher feedback. Anytime I'm writing an application for a grant or to apply for a new school, and I want to show the quality of the feedback we give our teachers through our coaching, I dig up something Brenda wrote to some lucky teacher and include that in our application because it was very effective, very clear, very positive, and very precise about what needed to change. Brenda was always prepared for pretty much anything, both professionally and personally. One time I was at her house and somebody was drinking something. I don't know, for some reason they're having difficulty. I don't know if they've just been to the dentist or whatever, but I said, Brenda, you don't happen to have any straws, do you? And she said, Laura, I have a drawer in my kitchen dedicated to straws. And she did. I'd never seen anything like it. She was extremely thoughtful. Not a birthday went by, not a Christmas went by. She saw a book, she thought you'd enjoy, or a quote, she thought of you and she sent it to you. She was just a really good friend. She had a really great sense of humor, and she was a great coach. She knew that improving classroom practices was her reason for being, and she threw herself into this work with tremendous success. She touched a lot of lives and made many teachers stronger, more organized, more prepared, more thoughtful. So I'm going to have John come up, and he's going to mention some of the special guests that are here today for Brenda, and he's going to talk about our first recipient of the Brenda Kahn Excellence in Education Award. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the afternoon.
Thanks, Laura. I want to begin by introducing Yvonne and Richard Legoski. Yvonne and Richard were close friends of Brenda's, and I know how much it means to them to be able to be here. So we thank you for being here and taking time out of your travel schedule to come to Baltimore. So welcome and thank you. Brenda's husband, who I got to know quite well, I think, over the time that Brenda was with BCP and in her last days. But Russ Kahn is here, and Russ, we're delighted to host you, so thank you for coming. And a former coach that we email once a week to try to ask her to come and do some part-time work is with us. So even though I'm annoyed that she always says no, I'm retired and having a good time, Sue Lattimore is back with us. So Sue, I know we have one board member from BCP with us. Are there more? I know that. Oh, good, George. I didn't see you there. Welcome. Glad to see people here who've come from the BCP board. I want to extend my thanks to Morgan State for all of the logistical help, and especially Dr. Prime and Dr. Bridges for being willing to do this in the first place. I appreciate that, and BCP appreciates that. We were going to make this a surprise presentation, and that all fell apart yesterday. So you don't need to know the backstory. Not a bad story, but I've known and worked with Marvelyn Johnson for more than 10 years. Marvelyn has worked for BCP and for Baltimore City Public Schools for considerably longer than that. Her expertise and effectiveness have been teachers for me and many, many others. She knows a huge amount about both direct instruction and coaching and mentoring. Marvelyn has worked in several of our schools, including Collington Square, Hampstead Hill Academy, and currently at our newest school, Frederick Elementary. In fact, the very first serious direct instruction lesson that I observed was in 2010. Marvelyn, I don't know if you remember this, but I came to watch Marvelyn teach a demonstration lesson with the 5th grade. And I learned a huge amount in that 45-minute time, both about direct instruction and about good teaching. I also want to say that Marvelyn is the best person I know at doing demonstration lessons. I don't think she's going to have to actually do one in an interview context in the near future. I certainly hope not, but she's very good at it. So if you ever have people who need some coaching and doing demo lessons or being observed, Marvelyn's an expert. I want to focus on her work at Frederick as an exemplar of her overall work with students and teachers. Frederick is the result of a 2017 public conversion charter school under BCP operation. It's the amalgamation of what were at the time the 2 lowest performing elementary schools in the state of Maryland. And that fact alone represents the challenges that we and the school faced in taking on this new initiative. One of the smartest early decisions that we made was to move Marvelyn to that school to tackle the need to teach and to train a group of new teachers, many of whom were new to direct instruction, many of whom were new to each other. Some were new to teaching generally. We had a new principal who fortunately is not so new now, and a wonderful leader for that institution. We made some smart decisions there too. We knew that there was going to be a lot of heavy lifting at Frederick, and we knew that Marvelyn was the person we needed alongside 2 other coaches, Charmaine Turner and Jody Jones. The work Marvelyn has done in 2.5 short years is magnificent. She's trained DI programs across grades. She's been metaphorically and literally holding the hands of teachers who've got varying degrees of experience and expertise. She's assiduous in ensuring that teachers are faithful to the DI philosophy and practice, since she knows that fidelity to the program is essential. It's a foundation for success. And what typifies Marvelyn's work is her unfailing good nature, her unflappable certainty that teachers can be effective, her relentless practice of coaching and mentoring every single one of the teachers in her groups. Marvelyn's good nature might disguise the fact that she does not accept mediocrity. She's gentle, encouraging, and determined. She really does believe that every teacher is capable of effective work if only they'll follow the script and the coaching advice. And I've rarely heard Marvelyn give up. In fact, I can't think of a single example of Marvelyn giving up on somebody. This isn't to suggest that there isn't steel in her spine. I've seen her rise with real force and impact when necessary. But that's an effective technique for her only because it appears so infrequently. She's always focused on results and success and getting the success for her students and teachers. That's the basic principle of her philosophy of everything that she does. She's collegial, she's warm-hearted, she's supportive, and she's very professional. Her reputation as a coach brings her more summer work than sometimes I think she wants or needs. She's an exceptional trainer, and she empathizes. And that's one of the rare qualities that coaches need, to be able to empathize with the people with whom they work. She's got high standards. She expects the same of others, no matter what their stage of career. On top of all this, she's one of the nicest people you could ever wish to meet. And I can't think of any other person who works within BCP, coach, teacher, mentor, trainer, or just plain human being, who's more deserving of accolades. And I'd like to think that Brenda would be just delighted to know that the first presentation of this award goes to Marvelyn Johnson. So Marvelyn, can you manage the steps and get up here? Marvelyn's been sick, so
This is an incredible honor. How many of you know when your supervisor gives you a call, you answer that call? So my supervisor called me last night and said, Martha, I really need you to be there. And of course, I answered the call. I want to say, first and foremost, give an honor to God. Because none of this is me. None of it. I'm an introvert by nature, but an extrovert in my work. I'm thankful to my BCP family, all of my colleagues. I'm thankful for the nominating committee. Thank you. This is completely unexpected. I'm thankful to my supervisors, Laura Doherty and John McGill, and my fearless and supportive principal, Harold Henry. This has been a tough week for me physically. However, I wouldn't miss this honor. Thank you. I'm honored and humbled to receive an award honoring my friend. She was more than just my colleague. She was the first person I met when I went to Collington Square. And I started my career there, and she was a teacher that I looked up to. And I followed in her footsteps, because you need to have someone to aspire to. And following in her footsteps, she became a coach, and then she was my mentor. And I continued to work closely with her, watching her as she operated and worked with teachers and students and changing lives one student, one teacher at a time. That's all we can hope for, is to touch one life and to make a difference. So I'm very thankful for having Brenda in my life. I carry her with me every single day. And this year has been extremely hard, because it's the first school year without her daily texts. So it's been very challenging, but I'm thankful for the opportunity to have her in my life, for the many experiences that we had together, and I'm thankful for this moment. Please know that I'm not done. God's not done with me yet. I have a lot of growing still to do, as we do as educators. I'm proud to say that I've been a Baltimore City public school teacher for 22 years, and I started in a very difficult place, but it was the heart. It was the heart. A lot of great people came out of Collington Square, and I'm thankful for that journey, and I look forward to the many things to come. Brenda has tough shoes to fill, and so I'm still learning, I'm still growing, and as we all are. Thank you, BCP.
We gave Marlon a plaque, and I tried to walk away with the check, but I did give her the check. And, this will go in the first instance to Frederick Elementary, and this will rotate in the future. There are 24 plaques on here, so there'll be 23 names to go on here over the next 23 years, and my hope is that every one of the BCP schools gets to have this for at least a year on a rotating basis when their candidates win. We've never done an award before at BCP, for good reason, because it's hard to pinpoint so many, an award recipient when there are so many wonderful candidates. It would be impossible, and I want to thank the principals for helping make this decision with regard to Marvel. It wasn't a tough call for us at all, so we're delighted on behalf of Marvel, so thank you all. We're going to get right into the panel program now, and we're delighted that we've got significant panelists from significant places, including Morgan State. So we're grateful to the panelists. And I want to very quickly introduce the facilitator, who is Martha James Hassan. Some of you were in her cultural fluency session this morning, and Martha, I heard wonderful reports about how that went. You can read Martha's bio in the program. It's extensive, but we're fortunate in part because one of her areas of expertise in urban education is cultural competency, diversity, anti-racism. Those are all things that we all need to keep at the forefront of our minds. And so, Martha, we thank you. Martha is also a school board commissioner, so we're doubly happy to have somebody who represents Baltimore City Public Schools in that capacity join us and be the facilitator. So, Martha, over to you.
Thank you all. Thank you for being here at Morgan. I'd like to quickly just give a couple shout outs. I have a number of my colleagues who are here, so if my Morgan colleagues could please stand up and we can honor you for being here. Dr. Thurman Bridges, Dr. Billy Mullins, Dr. Charles Carter, and then as you met, Dean Klein and Dr. Allen. Thank you so much. It is fascinating and fun to be here as your boss's boss's boss. And in my role as school commissioner. So just a little bit about me and how I got to that space. I have been a teacher for 15 years. I was a building level administrator and a district level administrator for 5. And in those seats, I never felt like I was able to really impact the lives of students the way that I wanted to. I could make small changes in my own space, but was not able to do systemic change. So part of my motivation in transitioning full-time to higher education was to get to a place where I would be able to serve on the school board, where I would be able to set policy and make things happen. With that, I'll give my shameless plug as the chairperson of the first policy committee for Baltimore City Public Schools. Our meetings are open to the public. We do important decision making that impacts you every day. The most recent that we did that impacted teachers was about principals and unannounced formal observations. So those types of things are policies, yet we don't hear from teachers. So I invite you to engage your students and to engage yourself. The policy meetings are 3:30 to 5:30 every third Tuesday of the month. The agenda is online. We welcome public comment. And then around about May, we'll be setting the policy calendar for next year. I'd love to hear from you what policies you think need to be reinforced, need to be reviewed, or need to be rewritten or created. So in my life, I'm a physical educator also, and I think that's really important. I shared with my session earlier about the curriculum of kinesthetic academics. Would you indulge me to share that little piece? Okay, perfect. So what I realized in my early career, I taught on the island of Guam, and most of my students were not native English speakers, but all the instruction was done in English. We did second language learning very, very differently in Guam. And that every student who came in and tested as an emergent level, so almost no instructional language in English, they were sent to physical education 6 hours a day. And if you think about it, there's so many visuals, there's so many things for people to watch, and it's such a great place to incubate instructional language, things like start, stop, listen, get a partner, make a circle, that's a blue line, that's a red line, that's northeast, southwest. Those kind of foundational things that are really essential for student survival. We had a child study team that would meet weekly, and once I felt like the student was able to socially and academically move on, they transitioned to an art class 1 hour a week, physical education 5 hours a week. The process repeated. The next class that was added was their science class, the next class was their math class, then social studies, then language arts. Those students remained with me in physical education all year long. So it really was a home base for families and communities. Coming as a new start out of college, which by the way, I did not do this, my Morgan alum, can you wave and can we give you some love for those of you who are just coming out of college? Oh no, there's more of you than that. Bigger, louder, there we go. Okay, thank you. But what did they know when they first, what did you know? What did I know when I first came out of college? So I did not know a lot about second language instruction. But when your learning curve is vertical, because your children demand it, you learn. And so then I transitioned back to the United States and I started teaching in special education. I taught predominantly students with emotional concerns and kids on the autism spectrum. And what I realized from those three groups, my second language learners, my kids with emotional concerns, and by the way, my kids with emotional concerns were predominantly male, were all black, all secondary students, and had been all to 6 to 18 month state-sponsored vacations, several of them in adult facilities. So between those and then my students with autism, I learned that they're all very, very smart individuals, but none of them had the language in English to tell people what they knew. So I developed a curriculum so that they could be able to use their bodies to facilitate their understanding and express their knowledge. So could you please stand up? Life is not a spectator sport, folks. Go ahead. If you would please, make your body as straight as it possibly can be. As straight as it possibly can be. It can or cannot look like the person next to you. No requirements there. Then go ahead and bend half of your body. Bend half your body. Any way you want. Excellent. Thank you. Have a seat. So my little joke around that is who doesn't like to start a presentation getting bowed to? And secondly, to ask you how old you were when you knew what straight was. Could you ask a 1, 2, or 3-year-old to make their body straight, and would they be able to? Could you ask a 2, 3, or 4-year-old to bend half their body, and would they be able to? And pretty much most audiences land on the fact that by 4, a child will know how to make a straight body and how to bend half of it. We don't introduce fractions until they're 7 or 8 years old. We have lost 3 years of instruction by not giving them the words to express what their bodies already knew. So we bring bodies in, we welcome children in home. So after that learning, I came back to the States. I taught elementary school when I did that piece. And then I really developed this philosophy of teach like I coach and coach like I teach. When you teach like you coach, you individualize instruction, you watch film to be better at your own practice, you go to development workshops, you engage with other coaches to figure out what best practices are, you watch film of your competitors. I've always tried to teach that way. And then when you coach, you also send home homework, but your homework is wildly different than what they're doing in practice. In practice, you come together to do group engaged activities. You come together for discussion. When you coach, you're practicing is weightlifting and running and watching films. So how can I teach in a way that captures the best of my coaching? And then, so moving on from that philosophy, I look now in my role as higher ed. And how am I teaching my future teachers to teach like coaches, to be present? And how are we using the metaphors of sport to address the needs we have for teacher recruitment and retention in Maryland? If an NCAA basketball coach wants a basketball player, they need a center, they need a power forward, they will go to the outer limits of the bayou to find them. And they will facilitate bringing them, and they will welcome them in and bring them on board. And what's our onboarding process typically in schools? Here's your insurance packet. How do we find them? Oh, they came to us. We need to be much more intentional about structuring our teacher recruitment and retention efforts like we would if we were their coach. We have challenges in Maryland around teacher recruitment and retention. One, we have an imported need every year where we bring in teachers from other places. This is challenged and exacerbated by the discourse between traditional certification and non-traditional certification, and who has the ability to effectively instruct our students. We have challenges around a representative teaching force that can provide mirrors and interrupt negative stereotypes that our children experience every day, as well as providing windows to the faculty or to students and families who may not demographically be represented by those teachers. We also, in our undergraduate preparation, have a lack of time and capacity to truly give our young people what they need to be effective teachers. If we're going to teach content, and we're going to teach pedagogy, and teach behavior management, and teach systems, and teach cultural competency, and lean in, there's not enough time to do that. And frankly, when you are young, you don't have any hooks to scaffold and hang that information on. So we need to be in better partnership with our schools to provide and support that ongoing professional development as young teachers have that aha moment of, oh crap, I didn't know how to do that. And where are we in a growth mindset that says, thank you for saying you didn't know what you didn't know, and now how can we provide you the resources and get you the supports to do that? And I think that's one of the huge strengths of the Baltimore Curriculum Project, is your coaching. So with that, I will add one more last comment, and it's a quote from Bell Hooks in her book, Teaching to Transgress. And in that she says, I celebrate teaching that enables transgression, a movement against and beyond boundaries. It is that movement which makes education the practice of freedom. And I offer you that quote in honor of my friend and colleague, Dr. Muriel Berkeley, who we all know and love very, very much. And I will now turn it over and introduce the panel. While the panel is talking, just so that you know, there should be some note cards at your table. We're going to allow each of the panelists to introduce themselves briefly, and then I'll be collecting your questions and spend the next period of time posing those questions to our panelists. So with that, I'd like to ask Kate to introduce herself, and I'm going to come join you at the table.
Good afternoon, everyone. Is this on? No? Or we can just do this. I got it.
It's on.
Good afternoon. Nope. You want to Good afternoon, everyone, again. My name is Kate Walsh, and I'm the president of the National Council on Teacher Quality, but my roots are here in Baltimore. I live here, and I actually was around when we started the Baltimore Curriculum Project while I was at the Able Foundation in the early 90s. So I feel like I've come home again. And so nice to see a lot of familiar faces, and I'd love to meet some new faces. I want to begin with an apology because we had incredibly hard time downloading slides that I had bought, and I think it was very distracting for you. So I really felt terrible right in the middle of that award with this wonderful teacher that we're sitting there trying to figure this out. So I want to begin with an apology. So my organization is dedicated to try to address the needs of the teacher workforce. And we do a lot of work with state governments, with institutions of higher education, and with school districts. So we are an organization that is dedicated to teachers. Our real audience are the people that control your lives. So state board members, superintendents, college professors who are teaching training. So I'm going to focus today mostly on teacher preparation and the work that we're doing. I'd like to begin by asking the folks in the audience, by show of hands, how many of you have been able to go to Montgomery, Alabama, to the Legacy Museum? Oh my gosh, no one.
Yeah, like 3.
One person, 2. That's it. Oh my God, get a bus. So if you haven't heard about the Legacy Museum down in Montgomery, it is an amazing effort that changed my life. And I'm 62 years old and didn't think I had anything to learn, and boy did I learn it. The museum is set up to chronicle and provide evidence that America's sorry history of institutionalized racism continues just in many different ways than it did in the time of slavery. So you walk into the museum and you go through, it's all in chronological order, and it's all done by testimony. So you read and hear the words of former slaves, as well as people who were slave owners. And then you think to yourself, okay, well, that's done, it's over. That all ended in 1864 or 5. And then you start going through the Jim Crow era. And if you haven't understood how systematic lynchings were, you need to go to this museum because it's appalling. And then you get into mass incarceration, and you're hearing letters from people. It alluded to segregation, and there was a few things on the wall at the end about schools and our system of educational inequity that exists in this nation. But what it didn't do was focus on what I think is the absolute worst offense of our nation's schools. And that is, our schools are not, for the most part, teaching Black and brown kids how to read. So I'm going to show you a little bit of data to back that up. Okay, so here we are in Maryland, and this is from the latest round of the nation's report known as the NAEP. And you see that Black and brown kids are just about twice as high, twice double the rate of illiteracy as white kids. And if I were to show you slides for the nation, you'd see something very similar, with some states doing worse than this. Maryland is about average. But this is not news. I think probably everyone in the room is familiar with a statistic like this one. But what I wanted to do is hammer home, and this gets at the core of the work of the Baltimore Curriculum Project, I want to hammer home that I believe that the Legacy Museum needs an annex to our failure to teach kids how to read when it is so unnecessary, when we have the tools that we require that we get to reduce our rate of reading failure in the United States from 1 in 3 kids down to 1 in 10. But we just haven't had the will to do so. And I would argue that the reason we haven't had the will to do so is because it isn't white affluent parents making all the noise. It's a lot of Black and brown kids who are the victims of this. So I want to show you a happy bit of story, and it's not going to be Maryland's. Okay, so this is how Maryland has done in terms of improving its reading scores. Now, keep in mind what I just said. We have the knowledge, as I think most of you in this room know, we have the knowledge and the ability to make that a line that goes like this. And we just haven't done it. Okay, so Maryland has actually stayed flat and actually gone down a bit. So I'm going to add the happy story. All right, this is Mississippi, the poorest poorest state in the country. Mississippi had the most dramatic increases in student literacy of any state in the country. Massachusetts does a worse job educating its poor kids than the state of Mississippi does, which is, believe me, it says a lot, right? So what did Mississippi do? Mississippi got serious about teaching kids to read, beginning with what teachers ought to know about how to teach reading before they get in the classroom. So this tells the story of how Mississippi revamped its teacher preparation programs, how it then went in the classroom and made sure teachers had the tools they needed and the texts they needed to teach reading, which is very similar to what you all are doing here. My organization has been dedicated now for 15 years, tracking progress on reading in teacher preparation programs. There is no more important job of a teacher preparation program than to teach explicit, systematic, science-based approaches to teaching reading. But I will tell you that it has been largely absent in most of the nation's programs. Ideology and ignorance have prevailed. So what we do is we regularly rate programs on how well they do in teacher preparation. Now, on Monday, we're going to be releasing these new scores. So I'm giving you a sneak peek at some of what we've learned. But I will tell you that we do have important progress to show. So this is data that no one else has seen. It's brand new data. It's going to come out on Monday. But also on Monday, we'll come out with scores for every program in the state of Maryland on how well they teach reading, okay? And you can see, those of you, you're undoubtedly familiar with the 5 components of effective reading. You can see the nation is finally making progress. Here we are from 2013 to 2020, where we have seen finally institutions are beginning to adopt what is scientifically based. Here is the breakout in scores. So when Monday comes, you're going to see only 30% of the programs in the state of Maryland are teaching teachers how to teach reading. And I don't know about the principals that are in this room, or those of you who supervise teachers or coaches, how many times you've sat before a teacher who cried because they did not have this knowledge and they know that they have let their kids down year in and year out because no one ever gave them this information. So teachers are as much the victims of this as students. Well, I'd say students are more the victims because our lives are permanently altered, but teachers are victims here. So in terms of progress, Maryland is flat. Maryland Maryland needs to have, Maryland needs a little sense of urgency here. This is something that other states are taking very seriously, but this state has stayed largely silent on. This chart will show you that in those in the ochre color, the yellow color, are states where they haven't made much progress since 2016. Look at Mississippi, Florida, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arkansas has made incredible progress. So when I say this, giving teachers knowledge of reading is one of 4 things they have to do. So I just don't want anyone to get the impression that if programs were to take this more seriously and teach the 5 components of effective reading instruction, that all of a sudden we've solved this problem. You guys know that that does not solve it. You also need good screening tools, you need good curricula, and you need good support. And so I think you're honored to have the kind of structure that you have here at the Baltimore Curriculum Project. So I want to put one more thought into you, which is probably less familiar to those of you that are here today. I want to talk about, it's not just knowledge of how to teach kids to decode. The other major problem that we're seeing with the teacher preparation is a lack of attention to the content knowledge of the elementary school teacher. Does anyone know why it is so critical that elementary teachers get a broad exposure to science, social studies, English literature, language literature, and well, you talk about math, but that's a little bit separate from what I'm talking about now. Does anybody know why it is not just, it's great for everybody to know something about the world? Does anybody here want to offer something? Why it is that teachers must know something about science and history? Nobody has any theories? Go ahead.
Just the importance of informational text and comprehension.
It's all about reading comprehension. So we wonder why in the United States kids struggle with reading comprehension, because there is very little knowledge building that's going on in our schools. So you have teachers who have not themselves had a very good education in science and history, who are going on and repeating a vicious cycle. So when we put teachers in the classroom who don't have that knowledge, we are repeating history, and we're not doing anything to improve children's reading comprehension. All comprehension is contextual. If you know a lot about baseball, you may have great comprehension in baseball, but you don't know a thing about how cricket is played. So there is no such thing. There's an over-reliance on comprehension strategies as a way to build comprehension. The most effective, the most powerhouse way to build comprehension is by building knowledge, okay? So related to that is what happens in teacher preparation. When we look at programs across the country and what they're teaching, how they're preparing their elementary teachers, there is almost no attention to their content coursework. And I'll explain that how, but let's look at this slide. Okay, so what this shows you is what percentage of programs in the nation require coursework that is relevant to what is going to be taught in elementary grades, or what we would like to think should be taught in elementary grades. And it's not a very pretty picture. There is huge neglect of world history, as if we're all just one little island and nothing else is going on around us. And in science, you can see it's appalling. There's almost no attention. So does that mean institutions are not teaching, are not requiring any science or history? No, it doesn't, but this is what happens. They're given a long list of electives, and they're saying, pick the one that you want to take. So you're 19 years old, and you see a list of all the history courses you can take, and there's one on the American Revolution, and there's one on the US through World War II, and there's one on the sexual revolution in the 1960s. Which do you think the 19-year-old is going to pick? The sexual revolution. So we have to, higher ed has to get more prescriptive about what these kids need. They say you must take a science course. So they'll take biology. But then there's no chemistry, no earth science. And guess what happens? So if you come from a really good education, you're probably okay, right? Many of you in this room said, well, I didn't need those survey courses in college, I had them in high school. But here is how this impacts the diversity of our classrooms. If you look at pass rates on licensure tests that every elementary teacher has to take, and you look at the pass rates for white kids, who tend to be more affluent, who tend to have had greater access to a higher quality education, and compared to Black and Latinx populations who do not get the same access to a high quality K-12 education and who are more dependent on their teacher preparation program, guess what happens? This is where we drain, this is where we lose Black and brown teachers. These are folks we want in the profession who can't pass their licensing tests. Now, if these folks were given the coursework that they needed to pass that test, they would be fine. But this is simply another example of how we don't attend to the needs of not only our K-12 students, but our teachers. So we lose about 8,000 Black teachers a year because they can't pass the licensing test. A lot of people are saying, let's get rid of the licensing test then. Well, so our solution now is to lower the barriers to the profession, and what happens? Our kids suffer. So this is a problem that I think belongs to teacher preparation. I'm going to close there and we'll have time for more comments, but I think that there's a lot about this licensing test issue, which is very relevant to today's discussion. I look forward to bringing that up further in our comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Next, I'll invite Dr. Simone Gibson up to share some thoughts on her perspective on this. You're done.
Yeah, I'm gonna say that. This is huge. Good afternoon. How we doing? We awake a little bit? Okay. My name is Dr. Simone Gibson. I'm an associate professor here at Morgan State University in the Department of Teacher Education. I have been tasked this afternoon with speaking with you about the recruitment of teachers, specifically the recruitment of Black and brown teachers. And I've spoken with a number of you actually in this audience today about what are the best things to talk about, what's the best way to address this topic. And ultimately what I settled on is a couple questions. My intent is not to offend you with the questions, but maybe to stimulate a bit of conversation. I think very often we get asked as teacher educators or as educators or stakeholders to have solutions to really big problems, right? We're considered to be experts, but the reality is we're up here learning from you. So I come to you with more questions than answers, but I got a couple ideas as well. So again, I'm tasked with speaking about the recruitment of teacher educators, specifically, in particular, Black and brown teacher educators. When I think about why we need, or there's this huge push to recruit Black and brown teachers, what comes to mind immediately is the fact that we exist within a system that is not working for our Black and brown children, largely, right? And there's this idea that if you are Black and brown and you are matched with a Black and brown child, aha, magic is gonna happen and these issues will dissipate and go away. And we know that is not necessarily the case, but I won't go into that today. But what I will do is ask a question. As we consider how is it that we go about recruiting teachers, my question to you as teachers is how is it that you are perpetuating current issues within the school system? Let me back up. When I'm talking about how you perpetuate current issues, I'm really curious about how is it that you go about telling the story of the work that you're doing in schools, because ultimately, if we want to recruit really impactful teachers, we've got to do a better job of telling a different story about what's going on in our classrooms. Because the story right now is overwhelmingly negative. So if you want to recruit folks like yourselves, you may say, well, we came into education in spite of the stories. But again, the question that I tasked you with a minute ago was, what is your role in perpetuating the existence of the systems that are going on in schools right now? We okay so far? Okay. As teachers, you all are some of the most powerful people in the world. You may not know it, you may not believe it, but let me tell you this. If in Baltimore City, I looked at some of these statistics, there are about 600,000 people in Baltimore City, okay? Of that 600,000, about 20% are people who are 18 years or younger. So every day within schools, we as teachers have access to 20% of the population. And 63% of that population is Black. We just heard some really troubling statistics. We know the story about what's going on with Black and brown learners in this country. In Baltimore City, another statistic, about 22% of all individuals in Baltimore City are living at or below the poverty line. Okay. In Baltimore City, knowing these statistics, there are about 4,900 teachers. 4,900 doesn't seem like a big number in comparison to 600,000, which is the total population. However, if every teacher has about 15 students, that means that on a daily basis, teachers are seeing about 73,000 people. That's a sixth of the population in Baltimore City. So I go back to the original, one of the questions I have for you, what story are you telling? What stories are we telling about our interactions with our students? What stories are we giving to our students so that they in turn can go home and talk to their families and their parents and their friends and their relatives about the awesome work that's going on in your classrooms? You play a role in that. If indeed, on a daily basis, teachers have access to about 73,000 kids, if these kids go home, and talk to just one adult, I mean, we've doubled. That's 140,000 people on a daily basis that we have at our fingertips, potentially. That's power. So again, I'm asking you, how do you use this power that you have? How is it that you as teachers interacting with the 73,000 kids on a daily basis, how is it that you can go about reshaping the narrative about education of Black and brown kids in this city, or just kids in general, so that we can do a better job of recruiting teachers? You play a role in that. We play a role in that. What stories are we hearing? What stories are we telling? And what is our control within that storytelling? When we talk about reshaping the narrative of learners and teachers in Baltimore City, there's this concept called stereotype threat. Raise your hand if you've heard of stereotype threat. Okay. Your hands aren't high, let me see. Okay, all right. So in a nutshell, stereotype threat is a concept that means ultimately you become how people see you, okay? This is where storytelling becomes essential. One of your roles, one of your many roles. If kids constantly hear stories about being failures, about being dropouts, about being incapable and incompetent, that reproduces itself in all types of awful ways. And we see the impact of this in some of these harrowing statistics about little children in this city. As storytellers, you all play a role in ensuring that our children see themselves in different lights and in different images. And many of you, I'm preaching to the choir because you do this, but too many of you do not. So how do we as teacher educators, or how do you as current teachers help incoming teachers, people who may potentially want to be teachers, or just the grander teaching population? How do we recreate this narrative about the work that we do? And that we show it in ways that are positive instead of always harping on the negative. We got a lot of good stuff that we're doing. On that note, when we're talking about the good work that we're doing, I find it really interesting that there's this conversation about the need to recruit more teachers, but very often when we do recruit these teachers, we do not give them the power to express their views and express their views in meaningful ways that help broaden the horizons of some of the kids that we teach. What's the point of having diversity in schools if at the end of the day, teachers are silenced and muted through curriculum and different policies in place that threaten their livelihood as teachers? What's the point? At the end of the day, I think it is really, really important for us as teachers to engage meaningfully around how do we engage our kids with socio-political awareness. That's a fat, juicy, sexy word. Let me break that down, because y'all know what it is, and some of you do it. How many of you are familiar with culturally responsive pedagogy? Let me see your hands. Yes. How many of you could define it for me? Let me get one person. I double dare you with a cherry on top. This is one of these terms that we tend to use that has come to mean a lot of something and nothing at the same time. There are three components of culturally responsive pedagogy, socio-political consciousness being the one that is most overlooked. Let me tell you what those are. According to Gloria Letton Billings, who is a bear, but created culturally responsive pedagogy. She said it's three things. One, it's the belief that your students can learn. On its face, that seems like a very simple declaration, but we know when we go into classrooms, what I say I believe and the ways I interact with my students says something completely different. One, the belief that kids can learn. Two, the idea that culture is dynamic. Culture is how we do things around here. We all do things very different depending on where we are or who we are around. We exist within a multitude of cultures, which means that we change. It's dynamic. We are not just one thing. And so when we talk about culturally responsive pedagogy and we talk about culture as dynamic, it is informing teachers and helping them teach their students that they are more than just one thing. So if you're not good in this one particular thing, that doesn't mean that's all you are. You're an amalgamation of multitude of cultural exposures. And three, we get to socio-political awareness. This is when you as teacher take the responsibility of getting to know your families and your kids in that community that they exist within to try to identify what are the issues that are impacting inequitable outcomes for my kids. And how do I engage them around these topics? That is socio-political awareness, and it's hard. But at the end of the day, if we're going to talk about how to recruit teachers, if we're going to talk about specifically how to recruit Black and brown teachers to help address what's going on with our Black and brown kids, we've got to address the stories and the narrative about what we're doing in the classroom, and socio-political awareness has got to be a part of that story that we tell about the work we do. That's how things change. You as teachers have the ability and the authority to do it. And you're grown, you're real grown. So if you want to do it and you need help doing it because you're not doing it, that means you go to your administrator. And if your administrator doesn't know how to do it, they come and see some of us here. Because this is what we've built our work on. And this is power that you hold in terms of redefining how people think about teaching and learning in Baltimore City Public Schools. Next, how are you engaging parents? I had the opportunity to go to Wolf Street Academy, and when I tell you, I could have done backwards flips in there because they're doing some amazing work with parents. But what they're doing shouldn't be so amazing, it should be the norm, right? I go to too many schools where I see PTSA, parent participation at 10%. These are babies that we're talking about. And there are reasons why parents aren't involved, and you as teachers play a role in why they are not as involved. Let me give you an example of things that I did when I was a teacher. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. How many of us live in the same communities as our students? Okay, a few. I did not. So what I would do is I would go to the grocery store where my kids hung out. Hey, how we feel about that? Easy? Most of our kids participate in church activities, after school sports, be it dance, be it football, whatever. Talk to parents to figure out when are they doing these activities and just show up. Can I tell y'all how it changes the dynamic of a teacher and a student just to show up at an activity that the kids are not expecting you to be at, and it has nothing to do with school? How many of you have done this? Am I preaching to the choir? Yes. But you have control over this, even though you're tired and you're overworked and asked way too much of. You can do this because we've got to strengthen our relationships with our kids and their parents. Next, how many of you, well, let me not ask any more questions, but it's important for us to capitalize on the knowledge of our kids. Too many of our kids come to school in kindergarten and they don't have that foundational reading knowledge. I'm a reading person. And somehow we start blaming parents and we start making assessments and judgments about the intellectual abilities of our children at 5 and 6 years old. Our responsibility as teachers is to help them understand that they are indeed literate in something, and we can capitalize on that. When I taught in DC many years ago, I had a little boy. This was not in kindergarten. This was a second grader. Y'all familiar with DC? Okay, so he lived near 16th Street Heights, and if you're not familiar with 16th Street Heights, there are 4 lanes. You know, 2 on one side of the street, 2 on the other side of the street going opposite ways. And you're going 40, 50 miles an hour. So I had a second grader who could not read particularly well, but let me tell you what he could do. He could get a grocery list from his mother, get money from his mother, cross those 4 lanes of highway where people are driving 40 and 50 miles an hour, get to the market, get all the items that his mother needed, bring back correct change to her, and exist. I can't tell y'all what would happen to me as a second grader if that was my reality. Like, I would be a statistic, right? But this little boy has all kinds of amazing strengths and literacy abilities, but he couldn't read particularly well. As a teacher, that was opportunity for me to engage in and figure out, what do you do really well and how do I capitalize on that? Because that boy was certainly literate, just not in things that we tend to value in schools. As teachers, we can do this work where we get to know our kids and capitalize on their different strengths, their non-traditional literacy strengths, and capitalize on that in the classroom. Last but not least, how are we training our parents to support the work that we're doing in classrooms? We control this. If I'm teaching a child a concept, how do I go about engaging the parent meaningfully so that they in turn not just do a homework assignment, but they can supplement what I'm teaching the child? When it comes to reading, a lot of times, unfortunately, sometimes our parents are not as strong readers as their kids, and their kids may be struggling. But what efforts are being done from the teaching population to actually meaningfully engage parents and actually train parents? This is not you just shutting your door and the parents come and get the kids at the end of the day. We can actively work with parents. I have yet to meet a parent who sends a child to school and says, I can't wait for my child to fail today. Woo, this is the day. I think this is gonna be, they're here. They're a part of the solution. But my question to you as teachers is, how are you going about capitalizing on your parents' desires to be a part of the solution? On this note, I've lectured long enough. I was charged with speaking about the recruitment of teachers, specifically Black and brown teachers, and I'll end with what I began with, which is, what story are you telling? How are you enacting any of these suggestions that I've just given so that the rhetoric and the stories about who we are as teachers changes? Because I think when we're able to change this narrative about the work we do, I think we'll find it far easier to recruit like-minded folks such as yourself to do this good work. Thank you.
Standing up already on fabulous phase tours. Stand up for just a second. Would you wait? These are our student interns who are in your schools right now. I would like to express our gratitude to you for hosting them. And principals, Rhonda, Matt, you got them?
Yeah. Wait, don't make.
Oh, wait, Dr. Gibson wants to say something.
And also, we heard some statistics about what's going on in teacher education programs related to reading. We had to have some real good conversations in our department about what was not happening with our teachers, and you will be happy to know. These teachers can teach these chairs to read. Y'all heard me say that, right? They can teach the chairs to read. They got that. Thank you.
Thank you, and I was also, So just a quick reminder to fill out the cards at your table with any questions that you have. I'm going to invite everybody very, very quickly, 30 seconds. When I say move, please stand up and face one or two other people. Stand up and face one or two other people. Move. Here, your right palm is facing up towards your partner. You're going to take your left index finger, Dr. Gibson, I'm going to ask you to do that. Take your left index finger and place it in the center of my palm. Left index finger, that's pinky. All right, so everyone has their right palm facing up, their left index finger. You're going to count 1, 2, 3. You are going to try and catch your partner's finger as they try and escape. Go ahead. And thank you very much. Have a seat. As Kate mentioned, we need science and social studies so that children and young people can be contextualized learners. We also need relationship. The laughing you're doing right now, the standing up for just a very brief time did more to wake you up than a cup of coffee that you were drinking you wish you would have picked up an hour ago. So just as a reminder to modeling best practices, you need kids to be in relationship, you need kids to be moving. And with that, I will invite our third panelist to give a brief summary of his work. And I'm thinking, based on the way your name is written here, that you got to say the whole thing like a Tribe Called Quest. All right, so Principal Harold S. Henry Jr.
I got a much better reception than I got.
Good afternoon, everyone. There must be Frederick in the house. Thank you. So yes, I am Principal Henry, otherwise known as H2, Frederick Elementary School. And I'm going to talk really briefly, because I know we have some questions, but I wanted to share just a little bit about what we do, or what we try to do at Frederick around teacher retention. And I hope that through this presentation, maybe anybody who's thinking about leaving next year might stay, because they will hear something that they think is good, so they won't make a liar out of me for next year. Can I get those slides? Or?
Did they put them up? They didn't put them up. No, that's fine.
Okay.
They're up. No, those are mine.
Yeah. All right, buddy, we can go without it. So, as part of my vision or the leadership model at Frederick Elementary School, which we lovingly call the FES way, I focus teacher retention efforts around development of staff or development of teachers. So as we heard talking about teacher preparation and some of the things that are lacking in that preparation, one of the things that's also lacking in K-12 education altogether is attention to the development of the person that is in front of the student. That's not just from an academic standpoint, but also from a whole person standpoint. So I want to just talk a little bit briefly about the leadership model, specifically around retention of teachers and what we do to try to grow and develop teachers. So for us, we have what we would call a developmental leadership model, and it's focused on reflection and this idea of double loop learning, which is everyone in the organization is a learner, from student to teacher to principal to custodian to cafeteria worker. We are an organization that is focused on learning together. And in doing so, we focus our learning on how we develop adults as much as we develop students. So one of the things that we look at is reflection and this idea of double loop learning. And the premise behind this is that you start with the why. So we've heard from people like Simon Sinek and his talk about start with the why. This also comes from research that talks about if you can get people to understand why they're doing something, they're more likely to buy in, but more important than just buying in, they're more likely to take ownership of it themselves and then come up with even better and new ways to help reach the goal. So that's one of the big parts that we do. But in terms of how we try to create an environment that is conducive to having teachers want to be a part of FES, it's something that we call a holding environment. And this comes out of research in constructive developmental theory. A lot of what I do at Frederick as an academic-minded person is try to bridge the gap between research and not just educational research, but research in all fields of human development, adult learning, and how to make that actually apply to what we do in the school. So there's this concept of the holding environment. And basically, there's a lot of research around, especially millennial teachers at Frederick. We have a large number of millennial teachers. About 75% of our teachers are within their first 5 years of teaching. So not only are they young in age, but they're also in experience. So there's a different approach for a seasoned teacher than it is for a teacher who's just starting out, because their needs are different. And so we try to attend to what those different needs are. But in all cases, we create this thing or attempt to create what's called a holding environment. And what the holding environment is a place where people basically feel that they can feel safe and they can grow and develop, not only again professionally, but also from their own personal goals, their own whatever that may be, whether it's going to get another degree, whether it's becoming a hobby that they want to get better at. All of those things matter, because one thing we focus on is the identity of each one of our staff members and getting to know each other and what they bring to the table. That goes a long way in helping to create an environment where people want to stay. There's an old saying that says that people don't leave jobs, they leave bosses. So as a leader, it's my job to try to create an opportunity or create an atmosphere or an environment where people want to come just if they want to come talk to me. So how can I create that space, and how can I create that space and say, not just be able to come work at Frederick, but I feel like this is a place where I can grow. I feel like this is a place where I'm going to meet my personal goals as well as help the school meet its academic goals. So a couple of characteristics of the holding environment is that it must hold well. It must be a safe place. Hold well just means that there's safety. So Dr. Gibson talked about teachers having voice and empowerment. One thing that we're big on at Frederick as a part of our retention and everything else is around making sure that people understand that their voices are heard. What we find though, and the reality of it is a lot of times it's hard to sell that, so to speak, because of either prior experiences in other schools or other jobs or other careers, or even for our new teachers, what they have heard about principals or about schools. It's hard to get some people to believe that they actually do have a voice. And so when we're saying, or when I'm saying specifically, your voice matters, come to me with your ideas, come to me with your opinions. Sometimes some people take advantage of it, some others don't. So it's a part of how I have to address their development in order to have them understand that they can advocate for themselves and for their students in ways that may not be what we have in the handbook and the policy, as long as it makes sense. And I always say, if you have a strong argument, your argument is better than mine, then we can have a conversation. But you have to at least engage in the argument. That's a joke that we have within the school, but I think some people take it real serious and say, well, there's no point in me coming because I know my argument is not going to be as strong. But creating that atmosphere where people feel like their voices can be heard is certainly important. So that trust. The holding environment also has to have an element of what's called letting go. So it's similar to what we know as teachers, the concept of gradual release. So you want to hold well, you want to provide safe space for practice and for mistakes and for new ideas and things like that, but you also want to provide some release. The third component that's really important though is that the holding environment must remain in place. So letting go doesn't mean that the support structure completely goes away. Now you've got to go off and be on your own now. It's about whenever you need to come back to a space that feels well held, that opportunity is still there for you. So just because there's some let go, the holding environment still has to remain in place. Other considerations that we talk about for the holding environment, expectations have to be reasonable. Now, I'm all for high expectations, and I think we have very high expectations at Frederick, but they're also reasonable in terms of what we're asking people to do, and more importantly, again, going back to the why we're asking them to do it, because we know the situation that we're in terms of urban education and how urgent our work is, but it still has to be a reasonable expectation where a person feels like it is able to be accomplished. Because another thing that is contributes to teacher burnout is what they feel like that the expectation is just way too high and they have no way to meet it. Another part is affirmation of where they are currently in terms of their developmental stage, attention to what's called the growing edge, which is how far can you push that person to what's called their growing edge before they not break, but grow. So what is that point that you can push and give the challenge to a person to help them be able to get to the other side of that challenge without, again, feeling burnt out or feeling like their work is hopeless or anything like that. Trust and safety is absolutely important. That's something that we try to build, and you have to consider the capacity of your staff as well. Other considerations, looking at supports and challenges. So when we talk about the growing edge, it's about finding the balance of support and challenge for individuals. And if you look at this diagram here on the screen, you have challenge on one axis and support. And basically what we're saying is when the challenge is high, which our challenge is high, because we understand the difficulties we face in urban education, then the support level has to match that. Because you can't just give folks who are developing and growing, especially newer teachers who are just growing in terms of still learning the craft and their practice, a really high challenge and not provide the support. So one thing we're big on at FES is support. And one thing I learned in the first year, when a teacher would say, well, I don't feel like I'm being supported, I as a leader had to think about, well, how does this individual need to be supported? Because I could say there's tons of support around the building, but if it's not happening in a way that is actually helpful to the person, then it might as well not be there. And so when they say, well, I don't feel supported, we as leadership, myself starting with me, had to really look at, okay, just because we have a coach doesn't mean that the person feels supported. Because how is that coach interacting with that person? Are we coaching everybody the same way, or are we specializing our coaching, tailoring it to the individual that we're coaching? And coaching for development as opposed to just programmatic training and things like that. So if we look at that, finding that right balance between challenge and support. Also, if the challenge is really high and there's no support, then people retreat. If there's no challenge and there's no support, then they don't grow. But if the support is there, if there's no level of challenge and they're not being pushed, then it just affirms that they're good. So it's that teacher that you're giving a whole lot of support to and not pushing to be better, not pushing to be greater. You're just affirming the belief that they're already good and they don't need to change. But when you up the challenge, and we'll talk about what that looks like, then it makes a difference in terms of the growth of the individual. Certainly makes a difference in terms of academic achievement, but also the growth of the individual, which is the focus of the developmental leadership model. So out of also constructive developmental theory, one researcher came up with what she calls 4 pillar practices for development, which are teaming, providing leadership roles, engaging in collegial inquiry, and mentoring. At Frederick, I would say we are good with teaming, or at least providing opportunities for teaming, and also with providing leadership roles. We have teachers who have been assigned the role of teacher leader who, because of their relationship with others, because of their understanding of clarity of division and all of that. So we are pretty good with that. Where we want to improve definitely is in collegial inquiry, where teachers come together and learn on their own without the direction of leadership, and also providing mentoring. Again, the challenge for a school like mine, where again 75% of the teachers are newer, it's hard to find really strong mentors within the building. So we would look without the building, but it also presents a great opportunity for us to grow mentors, and that's part of what we're trying to do with the teacher leader role within the school. So again, when we talk about supports and challenge, these are just some examples. How to use teaming to provide a challenge. If you have a person in your building who struggles with getting their voice out and advocating for themselves, then one thing, a challenge might be to put them in a group and assign them a leadership role to say, you're the team leader or you're the group leader for this particular task. And then the support you give them is that you model it, you show them what it looks like. So it provides a balance of I'm putting you in an uncomfortable position because I want you to lead this assignment, which involves other people and then involves you being able to articulate a vision and a direction. But I'm also going to give you support by showing you what it looks like, allowing you to come ask questions when we have challenges or things like that. So that is a part of the larger picture of what we try to do at Frederick in terms of retaining teachers, because we try to provide development and support around more than just what it means to be a good teacher. We're trying to grow good people. We're trying to grow leaders. Our statement of purpose talks about developing future leaders in our students, but it actually doesn't say students. If you look at our statement of purpose, we're developing leaders top to bottom. So that means myself as a leader, I'm continuing to learn and grow, all the way down to students and everyone else in the building. It's about developing leadership throughout so that we can use wisdom, leadership, and change our community from the inside out. Thank you.
I'm hoping we testing. Okay. I'm hoping we leave that one down that's open. Pass that forward. Yep. If you have, turn these off for a second, just so we don't kill everybody's ears. Thanks. If you have additional questions or if questions emerge for you, just hold them up, and Laura, I believe, or Laura will dedicate someone else. We'll come around and collect them. Ooh, this is terrible.
Are those off?
These are.
That's off?
All right, we might have to just pass that one.
Yeah, it's
after
fine.
all. Sorry, apologize for that. I can use my outside voice. That's all. All right, so the first question, and thank you for those of you who have contributed questions. The first question that comes from the audience is for Kate. So Kate, do you think the recent push growth enlightening of the science of reading will continue to support the growth trends we are seeing? And then if Kate finishes relatively promptly, we'll throw the question to either of the two of you also.
I think the writer is asking about the work that's been started by a journalist, Emily Hanford. It's ironic with all the people that have been screaming about this issue now for years and falling on deaf ears, that a journalist who sort of got religion and wrote a story about this has caught on like wildfire. If you haven't read Emily Hanford's Hard Words, you should, or listen to it. It's a podcast. And I do think there is absolute momentum all over the country. I can tell you we are working with 50 states, not all 50, but a lion's share of them, and all of a sudden something's clicked. But I've been at this business long enough to know that things click, and then we get tired of them, and then we forget about them. So it's going to take really a lot of persistence to keep the push on reading going, but I think what happened in Mississippi got everyone's attention, and I'd like it to get some folks in Maryland's attention.
Principal Henry or Dr. Simone? Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Just real quick, typically within higher education, reading is taught from a very theoretical perspective. And I think what you're finally starting to see is a shift from that theory to actually more practical and application-based. So hopefully that trend itself will not just be a trend and become actually the norm. And I think that's what you're seeing in places like Mississippi.
Yeah, and let me just add, I just think it's kind of interesting because we've now looked at tens of thousands of reading courses in the United States. The most popular assignment given to prospective teachers, and I wonder if folks in this room had the same experience, was to journal about how you learned how to read when you were 6 years old. Does anyone in this room know how they learned how to read when they were 6 years old? I'm going to guess you really kind of don't. So there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, I think far too often the layperson thinks it just happens automatically.
Yes.
So this question I'll pose to the entire panel for whomever would like to take it. How do you recommend improving the diversity of staff when the staff at the school currently lacks diversity? And how can you encourage teachers of color to join the profession? Principal.
I think one way to talk about increasing diversity in staff, going back again to what Dr. Gibson was talking about, what's the story that we're telling? So when we look in terms of what's attractive to someone else, for someone else to want to go, that's why we try to include teachers in like interview panels and things like that to get a different perspective. Because of course I'm going to say what I believe is going on in the school, but the people who are actually seeing it from a different perspective, that voice carries more weight, especially when you can say, this was my experience and this is what it might be like for you as well. So I think that's one thing about the story that we tell, the narrative that we tell, that will help in terms of increasing diversity and recruitment of staff in the schools.
Well, the pipeline for diverse teachers is extremely leaky. So about the same percentage of Black folks enter college as white folks. So that is not the problem. The problem is the percentage of Black kids that finish college goes way down compared to white kids. And then the percentage who are interested in teaching is far less than white kids. And then when they get out, they do get hired. The retention is somewhat lower, not incredibly lower, but it is somewhat lower. A lot of people use Black teachers to exercise all the discipline or very stereotypical roles, which are tiresome, I think, to a lot of Black folks. And then, but I think for me, I think there is a sense of urgency that would be a great recruitment device. That we're losing Black and brown kids. And to me, if I were the one out there doing recruiting, I'd say, come be a part of this mission. Come be a part of a movement to fix educational inequity in the United States, because these are our people, and we cannot continue to lose so many lives. So I think that that is a message that would be very appealing and isn't out there enough.
Just real quick, y'all know, when you think about the Black middle class in this country and the history of the Black middle class, it's built on two professions, the church and education, right? So for years, these were some of the primary and only opportunities Black folks had out of slavery to kind of start to rise up from a financial and stability standpoint. So in 2020, we've got access to so many more fields. So even though many of us come from families, great-grandparents or grandparents who were educators, or in religion or some of the other fields where they were able to get some stability, the fact that there's so much competition now and Black folks were so excluded for so long, it's a natural, to me it seems natural that you would have Black folks saying, I'm interested in pursuing some other fields. But getting back to the stories that we tell, there's also this narrative that somehow if you're going to be a teacher, especially a teacher in the city, you've got to be a savior. And I think we've also got to change that narrative, right? The kids that are coming to our classroom are whole and full people. And they're bringing all kinds of awesomeness into our lives. So it's not You come to work with us so you can save these people. How about get an experience that's going to make you better? That's going to make you feel strong and feel good about yourself. It's not about, so I think we also need to challenge ourselves in terms of the way that we're going about recruitment, because everybody don't want to be a savior, right? But our kids don't necessarily always need savior.
Thank you. So the next question, I'm going to build off of some comments that Ms. Walsh offered. And that question is, can you speak to the balance of keeping great teachers in front of kids? So what I've seen in my experience in K-12 is you get a dynamic, great teacher of color, and they are within a year or two invited to administration, because administration also, rightly so, needs to right size itself. So in this question, how do we keep these teachers in front of kids versus moving them up? And how in education is moving up something that could be created that's not necessarily out of the classroom? No, it was building off of this, whoever.
Wait, can I say something that I know administrators, John, you're not gonna like me for this. Y'all, we gotta figure out a way to pay folks for the work they're doing, right? So some folks want to be administrators because there's a calling to do that, but some folks, for real, want to be administrators because you get more money and different types of responsibilities. What does it look like in a school if we pay teachers and administrators the same amount? What is that trajectory of teachers wanting to leave the classroom? How does this change that conversation? Okay, I'm just throwing that out there. Somebody is looking at me like, you better stop it. So I'm out. But I'm just saying we consider the structure in which we compensate folks.
Keep going, you're good.
So let me just add on to that. To save the principals, they have no control over that. Sorry, I do. So when I say come to the policy meetings, that's what I'm talking about. When I say at the end, when I do my shameless plea to get you all to support Kerwin, that's what we're talking about. So we need to become involved outside the schoolhouse, not outside the side as well. Now I'll pivot right back if anyone else would like to comment on teacher.
I think that's a great point, and it's definitely a factor. There's also the consideration of, from a leadership perspective, if I have a dynamic teacher who is moving one class, and I think about 3 other teachers that person could support as, let's say, a coach or something like that, and that putting that person in that position would then impact 3 classes as opposed to that one. That's a very real consideration in terms of why people get pulled out of the classroom as well. As much as also people just wanting leadership opportunity, and sometimes it's about a salary, and sometimes it's not. But I know for me, it's when I'm looking at the staff and I see not only talent, but I see will, and I see drive, and I see buy into vision and all that. And then this is a person who has influence. The impact of their influence on a greater number of people is also weighed against the influence or the impact of them teaching one class. So it's not, I don't think it's an easy proposition either way. Try to encourage people to do, who express an interest in continuing education, is to just do their homework, do their research on different types of programs, especially local programs, other programs that speak specifically to what you have as a professional goal. So as opposed to just going to get another master's in teaching, try to find something that is specific, because there are tons of programs. We heard up today about more than 5 doctoral programs, and that's great. But you have to find the one that speaks to what you want to do, and don't think that you have to do one just because that's what the person.
And 2, to establish some meaningful ways of addressing these issues. That's important whether you're talking about STEM, whether you're talking about STEAM, whether you're talking about anything. Okay, so I gave y'all an example earlier of things you can do to make better connections with parents and kids. Okay, and I talked about the grocery store, and I asked how many of you live in the communities with the kids, yada yada, going to school. How many goes to the grocery store? So what is the prospect of engaging in a conversation with kids where you're comparing cost of items in the grocery store and the items themselves? And when we talk about the items themselves, that goes to health, right? Because I know in the grocery store that I go to, which is 45 minutes away from here, like half of the grocery store is dedicated, what's that word and stuff? It's like fresh, and it's not supposed to have chemicals in it. Like organic, which means nothing. Like, I don't know. But anyway, like half the grocery stores are organic. When we go to some of the grocery stores in the communities that our kids are in, how often are they seeing that word? And why aren't they seeing that word? And what does that word mean? And what do foods look like and taste like that are associated with that? I mean, that's a STEM conversation, but it also relates to reading, and it relates to how it is helping kids recognize there are fundamental issues. And then the next step of that would be, well, how do we address that? If indeed we want more organic foods in our grocery store, well, what can we do as third graders? Well, we can start by writing letters. Well, who do we write letters to, and how do we write it? Y'all with me? That's an example of socio-political awareness in STEM and health and reading. It's you taking issues that are impacting outcomes for kids, and you can do that for any content area, and it's specifically important for our Black and brown kids. We can talk about Black and brown, but really what we're talking about is our marginalized children, right? Because we know what's going on with Black kids from a nationwide standpoint, but we're not really focused on the middle-class Black kids in this conversation. We're focused on the poor kids in this conversation, right? So it's important for them because ultimately, as I said a few minutes, we're not their saviors. Our job is not to save these kids, it's to help empower them. And it's through these types of conversations and the socio-political awareness where you're not only helping them to be aware, but also to think of ways to actively address these issues. That's a part of your power as well. And it's a part of their power in understanding that they play a role in controlling what's going on with them. They can do something.
And I will take a little liberty and say that I think Dr. Gibson also answered the question of what is being done to get curriculum writers to adopt our beliefs. And it's not happening until we do it. Until we empower ourselves to write those letters, to make those calls, to meet with those vendors, to contribute our own work, to develop our own teaching network and sharing resources, materials, and strategies to be able to force the change that may not otherwise happen.
So what happens if the 4,000 teachers in city schools, so I know there are different curriculum in different schools, well, what happens if you are teaching something that's not working as a teacher? What do you do? Seriously, what do you do if you're teaching something that is not impactful for your students? I'm curious. This is not intended to be a question that you mull over your own. Somebody help me. What do you do when you are teaching a curriculum that's not working for your kids? Yes, ma'am.
I often ask the kids, like, why isn't this working for you? What would be better for you?
Okay, so we talk to our kids and try to figure out what's going on and how do we address it. Anybody else? Any conversations with administrators? Okay, we talk to our administrators and our coaches. Do we write letters? Do we go out and explore other curriculum and bring those back? I'm just saying, like, we've got power and we've got authority and we're all grown. And I'm not saying that things change because you do this, but I am saying you can play a role in at least making the attempt, right?
So if you, and then once you have it, if you want to have a sort of one final sentence, now you would like to.
I would also say that there is definitely a conversation to be had about possibly changing curriculum, but the reality is whatever you move to is probably going to have the same issue. So another way to look at that is how do we, as a school, as a learning community, say what's going to work for our students? Let's take this curriculum that we have and tailor it to be relevant to our community. Because you can go find another curriculum and end up with the same issue, and then you'll have that same conversation, and that's how we get into this cycle of jumping from thing to thing, because there's nothing, I won't say there's nothing, there's very little out there that's going to do it all. So as the power that we have as individual teachers, but more importantly as a school community, is to come together and say, okay, if we're going to use this curriculum, how do we make it more relevant? How do we create samples and examples and problems that are not what the writers wrote, but it still meets the intended outcome, it still meets the standard, it still meets all of that, but we present it in a way and we present it using material that our students can relate to. That can happen within a school community. without having to go out and do a whole lot of research. But it does take a sacrifice of time to come together and say, let's look at this, let's rewrite these activities, let's rewrite this assessment as long as we're in line with standard and outcome. But when our students experience it, they're going to experience it in a way that they can connect to it, and then we'll meet the intended outcomes that we have. So that's, to me, is a much more powerful conversation than, oh, this curriculum doesn't work, we need to find and do something else. That may be the case, right? But what happens when that new thing you find does exactly the same thing? So if we want to build from within that school and have something that is sustainable, and that also goes, and I'll wrap up with this, that also goes to teacher retention, because now I feel like not only do I have a voice, but I have real influence and impact on what's happening every day when I go to work, every day in my students' lives, but in my own life. That gives me purpose and it re-energizes why I got into this work in the first place. If I can go to a place where I know that I have that level of impact, and it's not just this, oh, I'm so overwhelmed and overburdened. Yeah, I'm still going to be overwhelmed and overburdened, but at least it connects to my why as an educator, and I can get behind that, and I can do that. So that's what we're trying to build at Frederick, and I think that's a blueprint for all schools to do it from the inside out.
I guess if I wanted to say a couple things, and that is keep your eye on the ball. Q did a poll recently when they asked parents what was the most important job of their schools, and there are about 40 things listed. And the number one thing was teach my child to read and write. Because if you don't teach a child to read or write, they're not very likely to graduate from high school. They're far more likely to be in prison. If you look at our prison population, they're mostly illiterate. They're not going to hold a job, they're not going to be able to have access to a job that is a good job, that's productive, and they're not going to be an engaged citizen. And we're seeing the repercussions in this country of not having a citizenry who's able to stand up to a despot. So I think that there is a lot that we can do, but we have to stop tolerating the fact that 2/3 of the kids in this country who are not reading are the kids who have been underserved and marginalized. I don't think there's anything more important than anybody can do in this room.
If I had, well, my parting word would just be, y'all tell your story. Everyone in here is doing something really fantastic in the classroom, and everyone in here is working with fantastic kids. And in 2020, I know y'all have access, and I'm thinking about all kinds, or have access to all kinds of fantastic ways to tell your stories. Tell your stories. I can't read any more books about a teacher who taught for 1 year and got beat up by a child and quit teaching because the system is failing. I can't read those stories anymore. What I'm interested in are the stories of the folks who are sitting here who have been doing the work and are seeing the success stories. We need more of this. So my advice would be, please tell your story. It is powerful, and read it.
Thank you, Dr. Gibson. Thank you, Principal Henry, Ms. Walsh. 3 quick things that I'll leave you with. And one is to address the marginalization issue. Ask yourself the question, if we didn't inherit it, what would it look like? What would we make it look like? Rather than if it's what came to us. Second piece, to build off of what Dr. Gibson shared, your job that you can leave with today, your action step is start telling positive stories. Tell your negative water cooler stories, vent to each other, but once you leave those doors, tell the public how amazing you are and how amazing your children are. And then the third piece goes to my recruiting comment about teaching like a coach and the need to bring in people. And it's a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist monk, who said, "Great humans bring with them something like a hallowed atmosphere. And when we see them, we feel the peace, we feel the love, and we feel the courage." And with that, I'll leave you the sentence that I always end my classes and my seminars with: now, go be awesome.